Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
You can tell a lot about a company by where it invests. At ConocoPhillips, we're investing in Arctic science and engineering at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And we're supporting today's students and tomorrow's engineers at UAF. In fact, today, more than 100 of our employees are University of Alaska graduates, and our future is in their hands. We happen to think that's a pretty good investment. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 18th of February. As always, we encourage you to check out the latest watches, warnings, and advisories for your part of Alaska or the entire state all at once. Simply go to weather.gov/Alaska, or you can go to arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. Find each Weather Service office on Twitter. You can ask us questions or just check the latest goings on that way. You can find us on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska. We always love to get your snow reports, of course, or just some questions about the weather there as well. And find us on YouTube during the afternoon under NWS Anchorage. You'll get a brief afternoon outlook that'll take you through the next 2 days. And after this show on alaskapublic.org, you can find the complete broadcast of Alaska weather as well as previous days there if you're interested in watching a whole bunch of them at once. Sounds great? Get the popcorn. Here's a look at hazardous weather, and you'll notice that out around Ambler and across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, we still have winter weather advisory and wind chill advisories posted for parts of the south and west facing slopes there of the Brooks Range. That's about it. However, it is going to be pretty cold in these areas. Wind chill values could go as low as 40 to 50 below. And on top of that, visibility may drop a little bit around the Kiana area, and the worst wind chills probably north of Kivalina. So in these regions, again, still looking at enough wind and enough poor visibility in at least some parts of that area that we have advisories posted for winter weather conditions and just the wind chill alone. So still feeling pretty cold up there in those regions. If you're going to be outside for any length of time, make sure you're using the necessary precautions there and protect your skin. It won't take long again to get some serious damage and frostbite or worse, so be careful. Here's a look at the west and out around the Bering Sea. Two things you're going to notice here. We still have our northerly flow coming down the west coast, and we still have a lot of low clouds here. Here's the next frontal boundary, and here's the next low pressure system working its way northward. Now let's put this into motion. You can also pick up a stream of moisture. This is warmer and wetter air heading into the Gulf, and we've got this boundary slowly lifting northward here. We're going to start the loop one more time. Cold air running into that, being brought into that low pressure system here. That's slowly creeping its way toward the Aleutians. As it gets there, we'll start to see an opportunity for snow anywhere from the west to the eastern parts of the chain, and gradually, maybe by Friday, we'll start to see maybe a mix-over of rain and snow in some parts of the Aleutians. That would probably happen a little bit closer to the central Aleutians, but there is that possibility that we'll see that at least mixing, maybe change over to rain if it gets warm enough and that boundary shifts northward into the Bering Sea. So something to watch for there as we go over the next 2 to 3 days. Let's take a look at the rest of the state. And several areas of low pressure, one of those sitting very close to the Kenai Peninsula, another one obviously west of the Haida Gwaii region. And then we've got our boundary we were just watching there, that frontal structure situated south of the chain. And after that, high pressure is pretty much in charge of the north slope. So how does this all work? Well, we've got the northerly winds racing through the Bering Strait, and across the west, dragging in some of that cold and blustery wind across the northwestern parts of the Brooks Range, as we saw with the advisories there. We have moisture streaming into south central Alaska, creating snow. A lot of that seems to have ended up across some parts of the northern sections of the Prince William Sound area, but we have now dropped the winter storm warnings and the blizzard warnings for Thompson Pass. So still looks like it's going to snow in some areas, but probably not as much as what it originally looked like, with that band of snow heading just a little bit more into some parts of the northern Chugach Range. Now, as you look at southeast, here's that low pressure system working its way right up the coastline. It's spreading some snow showers there, mainly south of Sitka, it looked like late this afternoon. It's also dragging in some drier air across northern parts of southeast, giving places like Yakutat a little bit of a break, as well as northern sections of the Gulf. Probably creating some turbulence in this area today. We saw a number of reports of icing and turbulence across the region. Most of those seem to be low to perhaps moderate at worst. And down across the southern parts and western areas of the Gulf, you can see another blossoming of that cloud cover there as that warm and wet air tries to move back into the Gulf and take over. Across a large part of the interior, we saw partly to mostly sunny kind of day. There were some occasional cloud cover there, but not a whole lot of snow falling at this point. It's mainly just the wind and the cold and the dry air that you're dealing with there, especially again around northwestern sections of the Brooks Range. Here's a look at the weather map itself and the stationary boundary located around the Alaska Range and points west, locking in the coldest area. You can see some of that's trying to make its way into the interior. A lot of clearing here north of the Yukon today, with high pressure just offshore of Kaktovik. A few scattered snow showers across the southwest coast, and a few areas of snow and fog around the Pribilofs and areas around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. There's our frontal boundary once again, and you can see the speckled kind of mackerel sky here out across the southern Bering Sea, a sign of some pretty cold air when you're looking at the satellite picture there. But a lot of what you're also looking at is probably just the ice around the central and northern parts of the Bering. Just some occasional cloud cover there allows us to see that, and you can almost make out some of the patterns there in that ice flow. Areas of fog north of St. Lawrence Island earlier today, and then drier weather as that air moves across the peninsula. Kodiak Island, it really dries out and clears up and breaks up the cloud structure pattern there, but we do have that kind of ribbon of moisture working its way into the low pressure system there across south central Alaska. As of this map hour there, I believe around 3 o'clock or so, we're looking at fog and snow up around Talkeetna and some snow showers down around Port Alexander. As far as tonight goes, there will be some areas of rain and maybe rain mixed with snow across southern parts of southeast. It look like most of central and northern sections of southeast would be primarily dry tonight. Areas around Prince William Sound, south central, the Alaska Bowl, the Mat-Su Valleys, Talkeetna, probably looking at some accumulating snow, although amounts look to be generally light. Pockets of flurries mainly across the interior. Occasional wind there across the west and northwestern parts of the Brooks Range. And again, with the winter weather advisories there and wind chill advisories, you should use extreme caution there if you're going to be outside for any length of time. As I mentioned, high pressure just north of Kaktovik, a little over 1,020 millibars, was trying to slow the wind down, probably creating some layers of fog too. Areas of snow across the eastern parts of Siberia, and then we'll see some pockets of snow across the far western stretches of the Aleutians. And here's our frontal boundary just creeping into places like Adak and Atka, still south of Nikolsky, but you can see that area of rainfall trying to work its way in, a little bit of a ridge detected here in the surface chart, and another wave of low pressure now moving into the picture here from the south at 996 millibars. So as we get into Wednesday, this is now closing in on Haida Gwaii. That will start to bring in some slightly warmer weather, so don't be surprised if you see rain and snow across parts of southeast. A lot of that, again, should stay offshore. And we've got drier winds trying to create an offshore flow across northern areas around the Lynn Canal. Low pressure now into British Columbia and southern parts of the Yukon. And here's our front closing in just a little bit more across the Aleutians. Really hasn't made it across into the Bering Sea yet, but boy is it trying. 991 millibars. We've got pockets of snow developing all the way across the chain. And we'll have scattering of snow showers across south and western parts of Alaska, the Alaska Peninsula, and even out around Sandpoint. And across the west coast, things are remaining pretty dry for Northern Sound. Doesn't look like you'll see a very good chance of precipitation. A partly to mostly cloudy sky across the interior, and the farther north you go toward the Brooks Range, probably drying out and even more sunshine there. High pressure is sitting right over Barrow at 1,023 millibars. Will keep you cold, but probably slow the winds down. The winds should pick up a little bit more as you head out toward the Bering Strait. And again, the winds across the Brooks Range may still be a little bit stiff at times. Going into Thursday, not a big change in the northern pattern there. High pressure still sets up a decent ridge all the way from Siberia into northern parts of Canada. We've got some pockets of fog there across the lower areas. Notice the pressure pattern is really spread out as well here. So probably looking at a lot less wind across the Brooks Range. But once you get south of the Yukon now, we start to see those lines kind of squeezing together again. So we're probably going to get a little more wind here across the YK Delta into the Alaska Peninsula, and snow showers become possible as the day goes on into areas around Kodiak. And snow showers begin to pick up again across southeast through about Yakutat into Juneau, perhaps southern parts of Ketchikan. The thing we're going to have to watch, though, is this is starting to latch onto warmer weather. So will this all be snow? Might it be rain? Yeah, it could go either way. In fact, it could meet you right in the middle. So I would not say this is a very good lock for snow showers just yet. Looking back to the west and southwest, rain and snow showers there across the Aleutians will start to diminish a little bit. Notice now the low pressure pattern is shifted into the southern Bering Sea. We'll have a better chance for snow in places like the Pribilofs, probably some wind with that as well. So prepare for that as you head into Thursday and Friday. And around Bristol Bay and Kodiak, as I mentioned, areas of fog around St. Lawrence Island north of the Bering Strait. And a wave of low pressure here working through the Yukon will probably create a little more wind there for northern parts of southeast and the Copper River Basin. So that's a look at Thursday. After that, things get really messy, and we'll cover that a little bit more in detail tomorrow. Talking about temperature now, mid to upper 30s across southeast, so a milder day for you. A little bit of sunshine in the north there, a little bit of precipitation in the south. Around Prince William Sound, mid to upper 30s around Cordova and Valdez. 30 around Middleton Island this afternoon. Mid-20s up and down Cook Inlet today. Temperatures were a little bit colder around Glen Allen, of course, at 1 above, 1 below around Fort Greely, and 10 below around Denali. In Fairbanks today, temperatures made it up to about 4 degrees by late afternoon, 6 below around Northway and Eagle, not too far behind. Temperatures cooled off to below 10 below around Fort Yukon, 18 below for Arctic Village, and Anaktuvuk Pass was looking at temps at about 30 below. Across the Arctic coast, especially the Beaufort Sea coast, temperatures were closing in on 40 below in places like Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 7 below around Barrow, a little bit further out down the road around Wainwright, 18 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures saw readings anywhere from 5 to about 15 below, 4 below there in Shishmaref, 10 above though in Nome. And dry conditions prevailed around Norton Sound at 1 below there in Unalakleet. Grayling was looking at temperatures close to 0. Same goes for McGrath, about 2 below there. Bethel also close to 0. Same goes for Suvunga and Gamble, with temps in Bristol Bay in the teens and 20s. Low to mid-20s was the rule for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Lower 20s for Kodiak Island. Kodiak itself, 23 degrees. Upper teens around the Pribilofs, and mid to upper 20s for a large part of the chain, including Dutch Harbor and Alaska at 28. Overnight low temperatures are expected to stay in the upper 20s for most of the chain until you get out toward Dutch Harbor. Lower 20s for you, teens and 20s for the peninsula. The YK Delta should be chilly, anywhere from 0 to about 15 below. Unalakleet looking at 12 below, Nome 10 below, Fairbanks 24 below tonight, and significantly colder the farther north you go, anywhere from 25 to 35 below for the North Slope and the Brooks Range there. Anaktuvuk Pass 32 below, 40 below in Arctic Village, and southeast 20s and 30s for you with Prince William Sound back in the teens. Highs tomorrow in the 20s and 30s for South Central, Kodiak 27, Adak and Eka close to 40 degrees, mid to upper 30s for a large part of southeast, near 40 in fact for Ketchikan and Annette. The interior should see temperatures anywhere from 5 to 10 below around the Tanana Valley there, and probably the mid-Yukon. But once you get north again of the Yukon and into the Brooks Range, you're looking at readings as cold as 10, 15, 20 below for Anaktuvuk Pass. Amblers and Bettles probably 10 to 15 below. And the Arctic coast a little bit milder around Barrow, but Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, and Dead Horse anywhere from 35 to maybe 40 below again, thanks to that high pressure system sitting right on top of you. Flying weather shows IFR conditions building into the western parts of the chain and just south of Unalaska Dutch Harbor and the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. MVFR conditions running up most of southeast and into Prince William Sound, but not all the way, and across the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula and maybe just north and west of Talkeetna in the Alaska Range. Also across the North Slope around Barrow and through the Bering Strait, but most areas should have pretty decent flying weather visibility tomorrow. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass are both expected to be VFR throughout your Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should trend toward VFR after we get a little bit of a low deck in the morning. Rainy Pass trending toward VFR throughout the day. Windy Pass and Isabel Pass both expected to be VFR. Visual expected there in Mentasta Pass for your Wednesday. Tanita Pass expected to be visual. Portage MVFR mainly on the east side once again. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see some improving conditions. Freezing levels, no major change from yesterday, of course. We've got our surface freezing line kind of running right down the interchannels there in southeast. We've got some warmer weather trying to work its way up closer to the coastline and from the North Pacific. And we've got a little bit of a change out here across the western sections of the chain. Warmer air also lifting northward as that frontal boundary nears the central parts of the Aleutians tomorrow morning. As far as icing potential goes, probably not a whole lot of change from what we saw yesterday. We'll see many pockets of isolated or light icing potential, mainly rime, below 5,000 feet across south central, below 8,000, maybe above 1,000 in parts of southeast, and generally below 7,000 feet out across the chain. Other than that, don't really expect any rhyme or reason except that it's all rotating around that general circulation sitting in the Gulf, that overall low pressure pattern. Tomorrow's jet stream shows low pressure here across the Yukon, across the Arctic, high pressure building in across the eastern parts of Siberia, but the main jet core is still sitting here. We've got a little bit of a ridge taking shape across the Gulf, a little bit more of a southwesterly flow developing here. So we're going to watch that and see what happens as we head into the weekend and early parts of next week. It does seem to indicate an opportunity for a warmer and wetter period as we go into the last week of February. Probably not the kind of words you want to hear. North and easterly flow coming across the Bering Strait between 10 and about 40 knots or so. There's our next wave of low pressure out across the south and western chain. A little bit of a ridge developing here across the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Our current low pressure system across south central. The current system there is sitting across southeast. Neither one of them seem to move very much tomorrow. And low pressure sitting across the northern parts of the Yukon, directing northerly flow into the interior, but keeping the winds pretty light. At 3,000 feet, a little bit of a different pattern here. Low pressure sitting across south central, guiding the winds in across the interior relatively lightly, about 10 to 20 knots or so. We have an offshore flow across the central parts of the interior, or I'm sorry, southeast, more of a northeasterly wind, 10 to 20 knots there. Our next weather maker coming in across the Aleutians, guiding in those winds, generally from the east and southeast. Notice the winds pick up here to about 50 knots across Unalaska Dutch Harbor, and northeasterlies a little bit stronger across the Bering Strait and the northwest coast, anywhere from 25 to about 35 knots. That does include the western parts of the Brooks Range. So turbulence potential then generally below 6,000 feet and across the western Brooks Range here. Watch for some chop there, light to isolated moderate. Otherwise, pretty good flying weather across the interior and southwest Alaska tomorrow. We'll see some turbulence developing south of Haida Gwaii, probably across the eastern Aleutians, and in a few select spots across the YK Delta and across Norton Sound there, again below 6,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine forecast here in just a few minutes.
Let's work our way now through a METAR report and see what it tells us. The type of report is what you're going to see first, which normally, as we said, is going to be METAR. Occasionally, however, what you will see there instead of METAR is SPECI. And notice that when it's a special observation, it is not, you're not going to see the normal hourly time that the routine report is taken at. It's going to be some kind of oddball time, in this case 2035 Zulu. Rarely, you might see one other type of report where it might say test M. And what that is a test observation reported from an ASOS station that is not yet commissioned. Now, we take a look and we determine whether it's a routine or a special observation. The next thing that we want to look for is the 4 W's. The 4 W's are where, when, who, and when. Let's take a look at the where first of all. Where was this observation taken? And of course what that's going to be is the station identifier, in this case KDCA. In this case the weather is for KDCA, which is Washington National Airport in Washington, D.C. Suppose we'll find a lot of fog around there and Foggy Bottom? Maybe just some foggy thinking. Now, you'll notice that the station identifiers in the METAR reports are 4-letter rather than 3-character identifiers. KDCA, 4 letters. Only letters are used, no numbers at all. And the reason for that is it's been done to conform to the ICAO standard for airport identifiers. But if you take a look and you take the first letter of the station identifier away, take away the K here, what you'll come up with in most cases is the old familiar airport identifier that we've been used to seeing. Now, all the airports in the 48 contiguous states, those are the ones that are all stuck together in North America, begin with the letter K, followed by the three-letter identifier for the airport. DCA is the identifier we're all familiar with for Washington National, but you tack a K on the front of it, makes it KDCA, and that's an ICAO identifier. That's fine for the 48 contiguous states. What about Alaska? Alaskan airports all begin with PA for Pacific Alaskan. Let's take a look at Fairbanks. The identifier for Fairbanks is FAI. But remember, we're going to have a four-letter identifier, and it's going to start with PA. So the identifier for Fairbanks International becomes PAFA. PA for Pacific Alaskan, and then the first two letters of the regular airport identifier, in this case, FA. How about Hawaii? Well, Hawaiian airports begin with PH for Pacific Hawaiian. Let's take a look at Maui, at Kahului, Maui. The identifier for that is OGG, but we're going to take the first two letters of that and tack it on to the end of the PH. So what we get is PH for Pacific Hawaiian, and then OG, the first two letters of the OGG regular identifier. In Canada, the Canadian airports will all begin with CU, CW, CZ, or CY. The second W is when. When was the observation taken? That's always important to a pilot. So let's take a look at our METAR and figure out the when on that observation. The date and the time of observation are a 6-digit field plus the letter Z. Now the first two digits are the date, 11, the 11th day of the month. Now remember, this is a UTC day. It starts at midnight in Greenwich, England. The last four digits, 1955, are the time in Zulu that the observation was taken. The letter Z is on there to remind us that all observation and report times are in coordinated universal time. This particular weather observation was taken on the 11th day of the month at 1955 Zulu. If you want to find the time of the observation quickly, just zip right to the Z.
That's what I do every day. Here's a look at Wednesday's marine forecast in the southeast. You'll notice the winds in the Lynn Canal, probably the strongest anywhere. You'll see more onshore flow there in the coastal areas, around 25 knots. But as far as anything that might be a little more gusty, it'll probably be in the Lynn Canal, as you know. Southeasterlies there across the central and southern inner channels, around 10 to 25 knots, 2 to 5 foot seas in the inside there. And as you get out toward the Dixon entrance, some of those seas could climb to as high as 7 feet. Otherwise, you're looking at 9 to 15 feet with winds coming onshore from a westerly flow, 20 to 25 knots tomorrow. And a little bit of a shift in the inside on Thursday. Northerlies continue in the Lynn Canal. Southwesterlies around Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound. And more of a northwesterly flow coming down the southern inner channels, 10 knots with 3 to 7 foot seas continuing there. And onshore flow continues, but you see the shift a little bit there outside of Yakutat. 8 foot seas are expected, 14 foot seas a little bit closer to the Dixon entrance. And Sitka looking at 12 to 13 foot seas coming on shore. As we get into Wednesday in south central, winds coming in from the south and southwest over the ice with a 10-knot flow in the northern parts of the Cook Inlet. Westerlies coming across the Barren Islands around 30 knots or so with 7 to 8 foot seas there. On either side of Kodiak Island, a westerly flow 25 to 30 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas on either side. Southwesterlies outside of Prince William Sound. Inside, winds diminish to 10 knots from today from the east with a 2-foot sea. As we get into Thursday, the wind's still going relatively lightly across the north and western Gulf, around 20 knots or so. Northwesterlies now inside Prince William Sound. Northerlies, though, shifting into Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots with a 2-foot sea west of Kenai. A variable flow west of the Barren Islands, east of the Barren Islands. That's more of a westerly wind at 20 knots. And now an onshore flow to Kodiak with 30 knots there and a 10-foot sea on the western Gulf. For the Alaska Peninsula, a broad north and westerly flow will be predominant there. South of Sand Point, you're looking at more of a westerly wind with a 5-foot sea. Otherwise, 7-foot seas as you head up into Castle Cape. East of Chignik, a northwesterly wind, 25 knots. Northwesterlies also north of Cold Bay in the Bering Sea side, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea, and 20 knots with a northwest flow inside of Bristol Bay. That switches course on Thursday. More of an easterly wind now at 30 to 35 knots. Freezing spray is still an issue with 10-foot seas. As you get out a little bit more into the Bering Sea, southeasterlies coming in from the Pacific at 30 to 35 knots, and 12 to 13-foot seas are expected there. For the Aleutians, stronger winds across the west for Wednesday and Thursday. 12 to 13-foot seas are expected with 35 to 40-knot winds. Easterlies anywhere from Unalaska out toward Adak with 25 to 35-knot winds, and southeasterlies coming in from the Pacific with anywhere from 4 to 11-foot seas there on the Pacific side. As you get into Thursday, a little bit more of a mess as frontal boundaries nearing the chain there from the south. That's going to change the winds up and could make some pretty quick changes there where you are if you're out at sea. A southwesterly flow east of Adak at 20 knots will keep a southeasterly wind around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. 10-foot seas there on the south side. For the Pacific, you're looking at 25-knot winds with 11 to 12-foot seas. And look out in the west. The winds just crank up there across Attu at 45 knots with a 17-foot sea. Again, all as that low-pressure system in front start to work its way northward. Northerly still running down the coast on Wednesday. For the west coast, you're looking at northwesterlies outside of Kuskokwim Bay. Around the Pribilofs, a light and variable flow for a day anyway at 10 knots with a 3-foot sea. Freezing spray still possible around St. Matthew and as you get up toward Gamble, of course, at St. Lawrence Island, the ice is there. A 5-foot sea expected around the ice-free areas around St. Matthew Island. The winds pick back up on Thursday, and notice the shift again. A north and easterly flow starting to cruise as you get out toward the Pribilofs, 40 knots with a 16-foot sea. Easterlies around the Kuskokwim Bay, of course, you're looking at 35 knots over the ice, and northeasterlies north of Nunivak Island. And for the North Slope, light winds over the Beaufort. That's good news there for wind chill issues, and north and northeasterly winds coming down the Chukchi Seacoast anywhere from 10 to 30 knots as you get into Thursday. Little change there in direction, but not so much in speed for the Beaufort Seacoast, and northeasterlies coming into Kotzebue Sound around 20 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, winter weather advisories and wind chill advisories continue for the Kobuk and Noatak valleys there and the western slopes of the south-facing slopes of the western Brooks Range. Other than that, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories posted. We're looking at some light accumulating snow in south central, and for southeast, periods of rain and snow mainly in the southern parts of the chain, or the southern parts of southeast, I should say. For the chain, areas of snow may develop as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Some of that may start to mix in with rain. Same goes for southeast as warmer air is building in from the south. Light snow will continue in south central, and the winds are diminishing across a large part of the interior. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.